AITA for not giving my girlfriend my social security number so she can run a background check on me. I'm a 27-year-old guy who has been dating my girlfriend, who is 31, for just under a year now. Things between us have been going really well overall, and I feel like we've been building something solid. She's funny, smart, driven, and we share a lot of similar values. We've even talked about some long-term plans and where we might see ourselves in the future. I'll admit, I'm starting to picture her as someone I could really settle down with. But something happened tonight that has thrown me for a loop, and now I'm questioning how we're going to move forward from this. It started out like any normal evening. We had plans to stay in, cook dinner together, and maybe watch something on Netflix. She'd been a little quiet all day, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Everyone has their off days, and I figured she'd talk about whatever was on her mind when she was ready. After dinner, we were sitting on the couch, and she told me we needed to have a serious conversation. I could tell by her tone that she wasn't joking. Naturally, I started to get a little nervous because when someone prefaces a conversation like that, it usually means something heavy is coming. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "I need you to do something for me, and it's important." I asked her what it was, and she said, "I need your social security number." I froze for a second because I wasn't expecting that. Out of all the things she could have said, this was the last thing I saw coming. I immediately asked her why she needed it. Her response was that it was for her peace of mind. That didn't clarify much for me, so I pressed her, asking why in the world my social security number would be relevant to her peace of mind. That's when she opened up about something from her past. She told me that her last serious relationship had been with a guy who had essentially been living a double life. According to her, he had a whole history of criminal charges that he never told her about. She found out he had been involved in some pretty sketchy and dangerous activities, and to make matters worse, he ended up cheating on her. It sounded like a terrible experience, and I could see why it had left her with some serious trust issues. I told her I was sorry she had gone through that and that I could understand why she might be extra cautious now. But then she dropped the second bombshell. She told me that ever since breaking up with that ex, she has made it a point to have her friend, who works for the federal government, run background checks on the people she dates. She explained that it was her way of ensuring that she's not getting involved with someone who could put her in danger again. Since our relationship is getting more serious, she said it was time for her to do the same with me. To her, this was just a matter of protocol. I'll be honest, at this point, I was stunned. I told her I had nothing to hide. Seriously, my life is about as boring as it gets. I work, I go to school, I hit the gym, I play Dungeons and Dragons with my friends, and then I come home and watch anime. That's my whole routine. I don't even have so much as a parking ticket to my name. So while I had no problem with her wanting to feel safe, I told her there was no way I was handing over my social security number to someone I didn't know. She didn't take that well. She said I didn't understand what women go through and that my refusal was making her question whether I was hiding something. I told her that I fully acknowledged I couldn't understand her perspective as a woman, but that didn't mean I was going to give out my most sensitive personal information to a stranger. I explained that while I trusted her, I didn't know this friend of hers at all. For all I knew, he could be the most trustworthy person in the world, or he could be someone who misuses my information. Either way, it wasn't a risk I was willing to take. That's when things started to get really heated. She told me that her friend wasn't just some random guy, he's one of her best friends and is married to one of her close friends. She insisted that he was completely trustworthy and that I was being unreasonable by not trusting her judgment. I tried to stay calm, but I told her that it wasn't about her or her friend. It was about me and my right to protect my own personal information. I said, "You can trust him with your information if you want, but I don't know him, and I don't trust people I don't know with something as sensitive as my social security number." At that point, she got even more upset and said that our relationship couldn't move forward unless I gave her what she wanted. She said it wasn't fair for her to put herself at risk by continuing to date someone whose background she couldn't verify. That's when I told her that I respected her need for safety, but her past trauma didn't give her the right to demand something so personal from me or to try to strong-arm me into giving it. I also reminded her that just because someone works for the federal government doesn't mean they're automatically a saint. I used to work for the federal government myself, so I know firsthand that it's made up of all kinds of people. She accused me of being insensitive and of not caring about what she's been through. I told her that I did care, but I also needed her to respect my boundaries. When it became clear that we were going in circles and getting nowhere, I got up and left. I told her I needed some space to think because this whole situation was starting to feel like emotional manipulation. She hasn't spoken to me since, and now I'm left wondering if I handled this the right way or if there was something I could have done differently. From my perspective, it feels like she was trying to guilt-trip me into doing something I wasn't comfortable with. But at the same time, I can see that her past experiences have shaped the way she approaches relationships, and I don't want to dismiss that. I'm just struggling to figure out where the line is between understanding her trauma and standing firm on my own boundaries. I really care about her, but I don't know if this is something we can move past. What would you do in my shoes? Am I being unreasonable, or is this a red flag I can't ignore? Update 1. After reading all the comments and advice I received over the past few days, I spent a lot of time reflecting on the situation with my now ex-girlfriend. I wanted to make sure I wasn't letting my pride get in the way of making the right decision, and I also wanted to be certain I was being fair to both her and myself. A lot of people pointed out that while her concerns about safety were valid, the way she went about addressing them was deeply flawed. That perspective really stuck with me. It helped me see that maybe her approach was rooted more in fear and trauma than anything malicious. But still, that didn't change how uncomfortable her request made me feel. I'm the kind of person who needs to know that I've done everything I reasonably can before walking away from a relationship, so I decided to give it one last shot. It was New Year's Eve when I called her. I figured if we were going to have this conversation, it had to happen now, before the new year began. I didn't want to carry this unresolved tension into the next chapter of my life. I approached the conversation carefully, trying to balance understanding her point of view with standing firm on my own boundaries. I started by reiterating that I understood her need to feel safe and that I respected her past experiences and the way they shaped her concerns. But I also made it clear that her way of addressing those concerns, by demanding my social security number and involving a third party I didn't know, was a line I couldn't cross. I told her I was willing to compromise. I offered to pay for a background check through any legitimate service of her choosing, as long as it didn't require my social security number. I explained that I wasn't opposed to her wanting reassurance about my character, I was just unwilling to hand over sensitive information to someone I had never met and didn't trust. I was trying to meet her halfway because I genuinely cared about her and wanted to find a solution that worked for both of us. But she didn't see it that way. She immediately rejected the idea, insisting that the only background check she trusted was the one her friend could conduct. She said she knew him, trusted him, and felt confident in his ability to give her the information she needed. To her, my refusal to let her friend handle it meant I didn't understand her perspective or her fears. She doubled down on the idea that this was a non-negotiable step for her if our relationship was going to move forward. That's when it hit me, this wasn't just about safety or even her past trauma anymore. This was about trust, or, more specifically, the lack of it. She didn't trust me enough to take my word for it when I said I had nothing to hide. And she didn't trust me enough to accept my offer of a compromise. Instead, she was trying to force me to go along with her exact terms, and that was something I couldn't overlook. I realized that trust was the real issue here, and without it, there was no foundation for a healthy relationship. I told her as much. I explained that while I understood her past had made her cautious, I wasn't willing to pay for another man's sins. Her ex's criminal behavior had nothing to do with me, and I wasn't going to let her project his mistakes onto me. I wasn't going to compromise my boundaries or my sense of safety just to make her feel more comfortable. That's when things really started to unravel. She began crying, saying that I didn't care about her safety and that if I truly cared, I wouldn't have any problem giving her what she needed. She accused me of being insensitive and dismissive of how vulnerable women are in society. She said I didn't understand how scary the world could be for someone like her and that my refusal to go along with her request proved I didn't love her enough to prioritize her well-being. At first, I tried to stay calm and explain my perspective again, but the more she talked, the clearer it became that this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was an emotional standoff. She wasn't hearing me, and I wasn't budging. I finally told her that I felt like she was trying to manipulate me. Her tears and her arguments felt less like an honest expression of her feelings and more like an attempt to guilt me into giving her what she wanted. That realization was like a gut punch. I started to see the bigger picture. If this was how she handled a disagreement now, how would she handle future conflicts? Would she keep using emotional ultimatums to get her way? Would every argument end with her crying until I caved? I told her that I didn't feel safe continuing the relationship. I said that if she couldn't respect my boundaries and trust me without trying to force her will on me, then we had no future together. I was shaking as I said it. My anxiety was through the roof, and I could barely keep my thoughts straight. But I knew I had to stand my ground, even though it hurt to do so. She kept crying and brought up our plans for New Year's Eve, saying we were supposed to spend it with her parents. She asked what she was supposed to tell them now that everything was falling apart. I told her she should have thought about that before trying to strong-arm me into giving up my social security number. I wasn't trying to be cruel, I was just exhausted and out of patience. The conversation had drained me, and I didn't have anything left to give. I hung up the phone, and that was the end of it. We were officially over. Update 2. A few days after my New Year's Eve breakup, I was feeling a mix of emotions. Mostly, I was drained and exhausted, mentally and emotionally. The past week had been a whirlwind of arguments, realizations, and tough decisions. I kept replaying our final conversation in my head, wondering if I could have done or said anything differently. But at the same time, I felt resolute. I knew I'd made the right choice for myself, even if it hurt. There's no version of a healthy relationship where one person demands sensitive personal information and refuses to compromise. Still, the weight of it all lingered, and I felt like I needed to throw myself into something, anything, to keep my mind off her. I focused on work, picking up extra shifts and projects to fill my time. I reached out to friends I hadn't seen in a while and spent a couple of nights catching up over drinks or playing video games until the early hours of the morning. It was helpful to have that support system, even if I didn't share all the details of what had happened. A part of me just wanted to move on, to sweep the entire situation under the rug and leave it in the past. But life has a funny way of not letting you off the hook that easily. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. On the other end of the line was a man who introduced himself as Greg. The name caught my attention immediately. Greg was the so-called trusted friend my ex had mentioned during our argument. The one she claimed worked for the federal government and would be running the background check on me. At first, I thought he might be calling to defend her or plead her case, but what he said completely blindsided me. Greg told me that he hadn't even known my ex was dating anyone. He explained that, while he does work for the federal government, his role has nothing to do with conducting background checks or accessing personal data. In fact, he said he doesn't have the authority or the resources to perform the kind of search she claimed he could. The moment he said that, it felt like the ground shifted beneath me. Everything she told me, about him, about her safety concerns, about why she needed my social security number, was a complete fabrication. Greg went on to explain why he was calling. After our breakup, my ex had apparently reached out to him, ranting about how I'd refused to cooperate and how I didn't care about her safety. She'd framed it as though I was unreasonable, untrustworthy, and unsympathetic to her experiences. But as she kept talking and revealing more details about what had happened, Greg started to feel uneasy. Something about her story didn't sit right with him. He said it bothered him that she was demanding such sensitive information from me and that she'd dragged his name into it without his knowledge or consent. So, he decided to reach out to me directly to clear the air. As I listened to Greg, I felt a wave of emotions crash over me: shock, anger, disbelief, relief. I thanked him for being upfront and asked if this kind of behavior was normal for her. Greg hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but eventually admitted that my ex had a history of being overly controlling in her relationships. He said she'd pulled similar stunts before, although this was the first time she'd tried to use him as part of her tactics. He apologized for the role she tried to assign him and assured me he wanted no part in her schemes. When we hung up, I just sat there, staring at my phone in stunned silence. It was like the puzzle pieces had finally clicked into place, and the full picture was even uglier than I'd imagined. This wasn't just about her being overly cautious because of past trauma. She'd lied. She'd manipulated the situation, twisted the truth, and weaponized her past experiences to try to control me. And when that didn't work, she'd resorted to painting me as the villain in her story. It was infuriating and disheartening all at once. I realized then that my instincts had been right all along. Something about her behavior had felt off from the start, and I was glad I'd stood my ground. If I'd given in to her demands, who knows what kind of precedent that would have set for our relationship. The thought of spending years walking on eggshells, being manipulated into compromising my boundaries, made me shudder. I decided then and there to cut all ties with her completely. I blocked her number, unfollowed her on every social media platform, and deleted every trace of her from my phone. I didn't want to leave any door open for her to worm her way back into my life. After everything that had happened, I knew I needed to protect my peace and move forward without any lingering threads connecting us. I also reached out to Greg one last time to thank him for his honesty and to let him know he didn't need to worry about me involving him further. He seemed genuinely relieved, and we ended the conversation on good terms. Knowing there was at least one decent person in her circle made me feel a little better, though it didn't erase the anger and frustration I felt toward her. Over the next few days, I started to feel a sense of closure. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how toxic the situation had been and how much worse it could have gotten if I'd stayed. My ex's actions weren't just controlling, they were fundamentally dishonest. She tried to manipulate me, exploit her friend, and justify it all under the guise of safety. That kind of behavior wasn't just a red flag, it was a full-on parade of them. Update 3. I thought the saga was over after Greg's call. I truly believed that chapter of my life was closed and that I could finally move forward. But about a week later, as I was settling into a routine of work and catching up with friends, an email popped up in my inbox from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was short and simple, "I'm sorry." My stomach sank as soon as I saw it. I already knew who it was from before I even opened it. It was my ex. I hesitated for a long time before clicking on it. Part of me didn't even want to know what she had to say. I'd spent so much energy trying to move past the mess she created that I wasn't sure I could handle being dragged back into it. But curiosity, or maybe some lingering sense of closure I hadn't fully achieved, won out in the end. I clicked on the email and started reading. The tone of the message was different from anything I'd heard from her during our relationship or even in the lead-up to the breakup. It was apologetic, raw, and, if I'm being honest, deeply unsettling. She admitted outright that she'd lied about Greg. She confessed that he had no involvement in her plan to run a background check on me and that she'd only used his name to make her demand seem more legitimate. She acknowledged that her actions were manipulative and wrong, but she said they came from a place of deep fear. Her past trauma, she explained, had left her paranoid and unable to trust anyone fully. She admitted that she believed demanding my social security number would somehow prove I had nothing to hide. When I refused, she panicked. She said the escalation, the ultimatums, the crying, and the accusations, was her way of trying to regain control of a situation that had spiraled out of her grasp. As if that wasn't enough, the email took an even darker turn halfway through. She revealed that I wasn't the first person she tried to do this to. She confessed that in previous relationships, she'd gone behind her partners' backs and run background checks on them without their consent or knowledge. She claimed that those actions gave her a false sense of security at the time, but they ultimately left her feeling more isolated and distrustful. She admitted that the only reason she hadn't done the same to me was because she didn't have access to my social security number. Reading those words felt like a punch to the gut. I'd known her actions during our relationship were problematic, but I hadn't realized how deep the pattern ran. She ended the email by apologizing profusely. She said she realized now how invasive and unethical her behavior had been, not just with me but with all her past partners. She told me she'd started seeing a therapist and was working on addressing her trust issues and the trauma that had led her to act the way she did. She said she was committed to changing and wanted to make amends, not just with me but with everyone she'd hurt. Then came the part that made my heart race. She asked if there was any chance we could meet up to talk. I sat there staring at the screen for what felt like an eternity. I didn't know how to process everything I just read. On one hand, her apology seemed genuine. She was taking responsibility for her actions, seeking help, and trying to repair the damage she'd caused. That was more than I ever expected from her. But on the other hand, the idea of seeing her again felt like reopening a wound that had just started to heal. I didn't trust her, and I wasn't sure I ever could again. In the end, I decided not to meet up with her. While I appreciated her apology and her efforts to change, I knew it wasn't healthy for me to re-engage with someone who had caused me so much pain and stress. I replied to her email, thanking her for reaching out and wishing her the best with therapy. I told her I hoped she could find the peace and healing she was looking for, but I made it clear that I couldn't be part of her journey. It felt like the right thing to do, for both of us. For a few days, I felt at peace with my decision. I thought that was the end of it. But then, out of nowhere, she emailed me again. This time, the tone was different. She didn't just want to apologize or make amends, she wanted to try again. She said she'd had time to reflect on everything, and she believed we had something special that was worth fighting for. She admitted she'd made mistakes but said she was willing to do whatever it took to prove she'd changed. She asked me to give her another chance, to let her show me that she could be the kind of partner I deserved. I wish I could say I immediately deleted the email and moved on, but I didn't. Her words lingered in my mind, and as much as I didn't want to admit it, a part of me still cared about her. Despite everything, I missed her. I missed the good times, the connection we'd had before everything went sideways. I started questioning myself, had I been too quick to shut her out? Was I throwing away a chance at something real because of her mistakes? After all, people can change, right? I don't know what exactly pushed me to say yes, but I did. I told her we could give it another shot, but I was cautious, so cautious it almost felt like I was walking on eggshells. She seemed determined to prove herself, though. She talked openly about her therapy sessions and the work she was doing to unpack her issues. She apologized repeatedly, not just for the SSN incident but for all the ways she'd made me feel unheard and manipulated during our relationship. At first, I felt hopeful. Maybe this time would be different. But as the days turned into weeks, cracks started to show. Her paranoia didn't magically disappear just because she was in therapy. She still had moments where she questioned my honesty or seemed overly fixated on minor things. She would ask probing questions about my past relationships or my whereabouts, and though she framed it as wanting to understand me better, it felt like she was still searching for reasons not to trust me. I tried to be patient, reminding myself that healing takes time, but it started to wear on me. It felt like no matter what I did, she couldn't fully believe I was on her side. The final straw came one night when I caught her going through my phone while I was in the shower. I'd left it on the counter, and when I walked back into the room, there she was, scrolling through my messages. She looked up at me, startled, and tried to play it off like she'd just been curious. But that moment confirmed what I'd been feeling all along. No matter how many apologies she gave or how much therapy she went to, the trust between us was broken beyond repair. I ended things that night for good. This time, there was no hesitation, no second guessing. I realized that some patterns are too deeply ingrained to overcome, at least within the context of a relationship. I wished her well and walked away, knowing I'd done everything I could. And as painful as it was, it felt like the right decision, for both of us. Now I'm curious about your thoughts on all of this. What would you do if someone tried to control you like this in a relationship? Or maybe you've controlled someone in a relationship,